The LGBT Purge was a dark chapter in Canadian history when LGBT members of the military and federal public service were systematically discriminated against, harassed, and forced out of their jobs solely because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. As part of the Day of Pink's 2025 campaign, we are recognizing the 35th anniversary of when Michelle Douglas launched a landmark legal challenge in the Federal Court of Canada against the military's discriminatory policies against LGBTQ+ service members. This case was followed in 2016 by survivors of the LGBT Purge, who launched a nationwide class action lawsuit against the Canadian government. The three representative plaintiffs were Todd Ross, Martine Roy, and Alida Satalic. These brave Purge survivors led the class action on behalf of the class members. 2 years later, a historic settlement was reached in June 2018, including the infamous 2S LGBTQIA+ apology from the government. As a result of these activists, the federal government ended its discriminatory policy against gays and lesbians and allowed 2S LGBTQIA+ members to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces openly.
My name's Michelle Douglas. I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1986, so a long time ago, but I really wanted to serve my country in many ways. I was looking to become a police officer, expressing some interest in the military. They signed me up on the spot and I committed to making 9 years of service in the Canadian Armed Forces. The honor of serving Canada, which means a lot to me. But it was during one of my courses that I met a fellow officer and fell in love for the first time, which was really lovely, and she was lovely. Of course, because I was now in love with a woman, this was a very difficult circumstance for me to be in. I was removed from my job, made to return my badge as a police officer, and given another job in kind of, event planning. But I was lost in a fog, ashamed of what had happened to me, unsure what to do. I had to find work. So I kind of went back to what I knew, which was the government, and I became a tax collector. That was my very first job. I launched a lawsuit, and by 1992, when it was just about to go to trial, we had 3 weeks scheduled for trial. On the eve of that 3-week trial, the Government of Canada settled out of court with me, and the effect was the policy of discrimination against LGBTQ people serving in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1992 was ended. It was over. Formal discrimination was removed from the books. I just had fallen in love with a woman, but it changed my life. It opened my eyes to injustice all around me, and I started to become an activist. And I've now done that for more than 30 years. I met a lot of other people who are equally motivated to seek justice and equality, and have worked with them over the years. That's pretty much my story.
Hi, my name's Todd Ross. I was in the Navy from 1987 to 1990. I grew up in a small town in New Brunswick and was very involved with Army cadets. In 1987, I received a trophy for being the top Army cadet in the province of New Brunswick. It was also that year that I graduated, and I went to the recruiting office and signed up. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call offering me a position in the Navy. I had friends who had waited for a couple of years before they received a phone call from recruiting, so I was really excited. Thought I really don't know a lot about the Navy, but I'll give it a try. A few months later, I was approached by the military police, and a series of interviews, of polygraph exams or lie detector tests happened over the next several months. So in total, it was about 18 months. So I left 6 months early and took the honorable discharge. I didn't feel any honor in that discharge, though. I went back to my hometown in New Brunswick. So that whole experience took its toll on me, and it was several years later before I started fighting back that the opportunity came up where I was able to challenge the Government of Canada through a class action lawsuit. It actually took over 20 years before I was able to be part of the group of people that saw justice for all the people who have been discriminated against by the Canadian Armed Forces, the RCMP, or the civil service. So I moved from New Brunswick to Vancouver, where I felt nobody would know me there, so I could come out. And that was part of my process. I stayed a couple years in Vancouver and then ended up in Toronto. I was at one point holding down 4 jobs just to make ends meet. I eventually obtained a job working for a member of the provincial parliament in Ontario, and suddenly I found myself working in a cabinet minister's office in Ontario at Queen's Park. From there, I went on and did some government relations work as a lobbyist, and then started doing communications work as a consultant, and have had incredible opportunities through that. Most recently, I finally went back and finished my degree and obtained my Bachelor of Arts. So from somebody who was kicked out of the military, who dropped out of university, just keep going, and eventually you start working toward where you left off. Walking along the street, and I looked, and there was a Globe and Mail headline talking about Michelle Douglas. Seeing somebody challenge the Canadian government and challenge the policies of the Canadian military was very exciting. It wasn't something that I was able to do at the time, and I was still in the closet at that point. I still wasn't comfortable sharing my story. So I know it took a lot for you to share your story.
You know, from those days in 1992, when the lawsuit was ended, of course it changed my life in a moment, and it's really kind of been a defining moment in my entire life. It seemed like I'd almost peaked when I was 23 years old, and I was meeting people and changing my life maybe as an activist and getting more into it in a disproportionate way. Just like you've said, I think the lawyers who've stood up had such a profound impact on the tactics, right? The strategy of making change in the right sequence of things, so that, society was ready for the change at that point too. I think people who had experienced injustice were always ready for it. But, sometimes there's got to be that right formula. And it seems like that exactly happened when the class action lawsuit was launched, and what a change that made. In the class action lawsuit, it just opened up the possibility for a much broader sense of justice, that historical injustice of now what we were calling the LGBT Purge could finally be contended with. And it was strategic, brilliant, and inspiring, and just, I think, changed the lives and the country for so many. It was amazing what that lawsuit did and what you folks did. Pretty cool.
To the victims of the Purge who were surveilled, interrogated, and abused, who were forced to turn on their friends and colleagues, who lost wages, lost health, and lost loved ones. We betrayed you, and we are so sorry.
For me personally, I felt that it was quite healing. No one since 1992 had ever said they were sorry for the things I went through, the things we went through, which were really very bad. And I never felt that the community had been acknowledged in that way before. I loved that the Prime Minister used the word intersex at one point in that apology. That had never happened before, as far as I knew. It felt quite complete. It felt like the efforts of so many people went into this, and it was the leader of our country saying sorry, which is a very Canadian thing to do. But, apologies are always just one part of healing. And it's the post-apology action that, of course, matters a great deal. And we had a sense of what the plan was for that. So, yeah, I felt it very satisfying. How did you find it?
Yeah, and for me, going to Parliament that day, seeing all of the community members from across the country who were there, and seeing so many familiar faces and people that I had worked with, people that I had never met before but recognized, looking at them is like, oh wow, that's so-and-so. And I think the government really made an effort to bring in a lot of the 2S LGBTQI plus community to be witnesses that day. We were honored to sit directly across from the Prime Minister. As I sat there and we were waiting for the apology to happen, I remember a woman walked in and she had two younger people with her from school. And first thought was, well, who are these young people that are coming in? And it was two of the Prime Minister's children that he had pulled out of school that day so that they would be there to witness the apology. And then the day of the apology, as I sat there listening to the words, the thought went through my mind, like, I have to soak this in. This is something I never thought would ever happen. Mm-hmm. I never envisioned that the government of Canada would make an apology to the 2S LGBTQI plus community. There was that moment of like, wow, this is like a historic moment for our community. We know that there were so many purge survivors who didn't make it to the class action settlement. Mm-hmm. So the lawyers recommended that we set up a fund, and the government agreed to this, so that we were able to set up a multi-million-dollar fund called the LGBT Purge Fund, which you're now the executive director of, and set up this fund so that we could do reconciliation memorialization measures for those who did not make it through to the settlement of the class action. And we often informally refer to it as blood money. That these are the funds that would have gone to those individuals who passed away. There were other things that were part of the settlement agreement, and I'll let you explain some of the other pieces. But one of them that I look over it, and I look at your collar, and I see you proudly wearing the Pride Citation, the Canada Pride Citation, which is part of the honors of the Government of Canada. That this was something that is only available to purge survivors and only available to those who were in the class action. It was issued by the Canadian Heraldic Authority. Myself and Martine Roy had the chance to actually be there to help with the design of it. It has the 8 Pride colors, the 8 original Pride colors.
You did a beautiful job with it, I have to say.
And the maple leaf. So it signifies Canada, and it signifies what we went through, but also it's a recognition from the Government of Canada. So that was something that's incredibly important.
If you don't have the records, I think people wouldn't believe it happened here. If you don't have the records, people certainly diminish it or underestimate it. And if you don't make the records available, eventually they forget about it. So it's a big part of our storytelling. We created a huge report done by experts at the Fondation Re-Emergence and EGAL Canada to look at the circumstances of queer folks in the federal work environment, and produced a report called Emerging from the Purge. Like over 20 recommendations that really highlight how they can improve the circumstances for anyone who is queer, 2S, LGBTQI plus, working in the federal environment. So it's really sincerely inclusive, diverse, equitable, and justice-based employment, as we should have it. And that's a good collaboration. We're continuing to work on that. So, there's a lot of action-oriented projects coming out of this class action. I have to say, the brilliance of the creative minds that went into creating that. Congratulations, Todd, Martine, Alida, and the lawyers, because you really have made a difference for a lot of people. The LGBT Purge Fund came out as one of the developments from the class action lawsuit. It is such a creative and innovative outcome from something that's kind of often quite traditional, the outcome, someone maybe just receives a settlement or something. This did not happen in the class action lawsuit. It really was a very comprehensive outcome, and I think it was so creative and innovative in a way that was focused on getting justice for people for a long period of time. So I always look back at the representative plaintiffs and really thank you for that creativity that you brought to this. It's but for the creativity and dreams of all those folks out there, not just purge survivors, but perhaps family members or others compelled by this story, that can apply for these grants and then use them in a way to continue storytelling or benefit people who experience the purge.
We still see injustices happening, not only in the government, but around the country. There are places in the government we know there's still work to be done. There's places in the military we know there's still work to be done. So to be able to work with the government of Canada and these departments to address them, I think is something that we should all be proud of. Those efforts, and something that we need to keep pushing toward. That it's not over. There's still work to be done.
What we can learn from the LGBT purge is this was a period in time that spanned from the 1950s into the 1990s, where these injustices kept going on, where people knew what was happening was wrong. They kept happening. So many people fell victim. So many people were caught up in the events of the LGBT purge, and it could have stopped a lot sooner. What we did see is the courage of individuals who stood up, individuals like Michelle Douglas, but so many others who stood up and stood their ground and fought. And when that happened, when that started to happen, we saw things change. We saw the military policy change. It didn't change everything. Things don't happen overnight. But then other people picked up and other people carried on. That it became several pieces coming together. So when we did the class action lawsuit in 2016, starting in 2016, again, we picked up pieces that other people had been doing. We were standing on the shoulders of people who had come before us decades before, those people who were protesting in the streets in the 60s and 70s for our rights. And we remember those early battles. So the piece that we did contributed, and there were so many people that benefited from our work, but also we benefited from the work of so many others who came before us. And we know that others going forward will also benefit, and that there will be others who come along and are able to continue on the fight. So this is just one piece in the story. The story continues, and you all have the potential to be part of that story, that you get to be the next piece. You get to continue on this story in your fights. And there may be struggles that are very difficult, but you have it in you to be part of the fight, and you have it in you to be a strong person in whatever comes your way in the future.
I think the message I would say to people watching this is to believe in yourself. Invest in what is important to you. If you see injustice and you know something isn't right, it really is worth doing more than nothing about it. Whatever you can do, whatever you can think of to make change, maybe for yourself or for others, believe in your ability to do that. And I think one of the greatest privileges we have living in this country is that we can find other people who are like-minded and can pursue common goals. And always remember, at the base of all activism is respect, human rights, and dignity of everyone. So let that be your North Star, let that be your guide, and good luck. Don't stop.
Michelle Douglas and Todd Ross are living testaments to the strength and resilience of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. Their stories are an example of re-emergence and a reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right and just.
Cette année, la Journée Rose rend hommage aux militants de la purge LGBT, avec des ressources éducatives, une tournée nationale et bien plus encore. Consultez le site web de la Journée Rose pour savoir comment vous impliquer dans la campagne de cette année. En apprenant de notre passé, nous pouvons honorer ceux qui nous ont précédés et créer un avenir meilleur.
Join us in honoring the past and building a future where everyone can live and work without fear of discrimination. Visit the Day of Pink to learn about this year's campaign and honoring activists from the LGBT Purge, find free resources, and how you can get involved in this year's campaign.